when we have large amounts of grief, or grief we don't understand, or grief we feel we're not allowed to feel, or grief we feel we're going to be punished for, or grief that we have just because of bad things happening that we didn't really want happening, all sorts of kinds of grief we have accumulated generally as an adult through our childhood life. When we have grief, we build up this the feeling of our grief to such a point that we want to create fear as a way of suppressing our grief. So fear is a method, it's a selfish method to suppress your grief. That's its goal. Its goal is to make you get away from your bad feelings. So you say you're afraid of it, afraid of the feeling. I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. And you start creating fears. Now, fears are actual emotions, but you create these things when you're young. So sort of like when Dad, let's say, smacked me, belted me, punished me for speaking up, I now have a feeling in me that if I speak up, I will be punished. If I speak the truth, I will be punished. Because he did punish me. So I have a feeling now, he will punish me. That's my grief. And now I tell myself, I'm afraid to speak up.
That's what I have with you.
Yeah, well, you know, this is the relationship with your dad, right? Yeah. So afraid to speak up. Now the fear has been constructed to avoid the grief. So you're basically saying, I don't have, you're basically telling yourself with your fear saying, you don't have to speak up. God's laws are unfair. You shouldn't have to speak up. Is really what the fear is saying, right? False, of course. God expects you to speak up whether you might get punished or not. God expects you to speak up whether there's violence or not. That's what I do. That's what anybody who's learned God's truth will do. That's what you will do when you learn God's truth too. But in order to do that, you're going to have to feel the grief associated with speaking up with your dad. And you're going to have to work your way through some of that, right? But you spoke up with your dad, got hammered, got punished, and so now you're telling yourself, I don't have to feel that grief because I'm afraid to speak up. And that's enough justification for me to be untruthful, to be lacking in transparency. It's enough justification. Now, if it's not enough, when somebody says, Alex, you're afraid of speaking up, and you say, yeah, and I should be. It's really what you're saying, right? Yeah, and I should be. So really what that is creating, in fact, is a layer of rage above the fear, isn't it? So whenever somebody says you should speak up, you go, no, I shouldn't. I'm afraid. But really you're saying, pee off, get lost. I should be allowed to get away with not speaking up. Don't you know? In my childhood, my dad belted me for speaking up. And so what? If you had felt the grief, you would see the truth that you should always speak up. It's always better if you speak up than not, right? You'd see that. But the fear is saying, I am justified in not having to deal with this emotion, this grief that I have. I'm convinced that I don't have to do it, right? And then, of course, this constant fear, most men in particular go, and women too. Women handle fear very poorly generally. And so most men and women go, how do I, this fear bothers me a lot. How do I keep it under wraps? Keep it under control? Keep it suppressed? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll create a whole heap of addictions to support me keeping this fear as my justification to keep my fears working, right? And so what do I do? I start creating addictions. I gravitate towards people who don't expect me to tell the truth. I don't expect myself to tell the truth. So these are me feeding my addictions. I might even, sometimes my conscience bothers me about telling truth. So those nights, I take a little bit of alcohol just to numb my conscience out a bit and make me feel relaxed because I feel a bit uptight, Or turn to cigarette smoking. Calms me down. It's actually a stimulant that is calming me down. How does that work? It's got to be calming down my fear, something, right? So we turn to physical, emotional, sexual, even spiritual addictions. We've seen a lot here. Like, have a philosophy. Reincarnation is true. That's a good philosophy. What does that teach me? It teaches me that I can come back and sort it out later. Do you know what I mean? Just a simple thing like that. Just accept a new philosophy, because that's going to support me not dealing with that particular problem, right? Oh, I'm going to have, in the spirit world, I'm going to have some kind of life review. So why bother having one here? If it's all going to happen there, and also it's all going to be forgotten the next time I come, then isn't it better just to deal with what I got now and suppress it all and take what I can to support it? Or what about I'm in fear and I find psychedelic mushrooms calm me down. So in other words, I'm now churning to substances that drug my state in order to avoid it. Or I get so afraid and I feel so angry all the time and I feel I need to suppress my anger so much, I start getting depressed. So what do? I go along to a doctor and say, I'm depressed all the time. And he says, no worries, here's an antidepressant. And now I don't even have to worry about my anger or my fear anymore. I'm totally numb to everything. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And this is how we handle things. But none of it is actually dealing with the problem, right? And this is why we get sicker and sicker and worse, and because the actual problems are not being addressed. So when we want to avoid the grief, we have a layer of fear on top of it all. And when we don't want to acknowledge our fear, there's going to be addictions and rage when the addictions are not met. Yeah. And the way we have to undo it all, well, we can acknowledge our fears, can't we? We can be truthful about our real fears, but that's going to require some sensitivity emotionally. It's going to require me being transparent and open to the people around me, and maybe I don't want to do that. It's going to require acknowledging to myself that I'm not as strong as I think I am, and most of us don't want to admit that. It's going to, we're not strong because we're unable to cope with emotion. That's why we're not strong, really. But most of us think strength is suppression of emotion. So we have to admit a lot of things to us in order to get to the point where the actual awakening process about this fear, which is the sin, is actually there. And most of us don't get that far.
In regards to this sin I have,
Yep.
I feel like a little boy inside.
Well, you are. You're acting as you've been taught by your mother and your father. You've been acting, but you got to be careful with this, because then you could say, oh, that's all their fault. No, you're an adult male, 51. Didn't you say? 51 years old. How dare you keep blaming other people for 51 years?
It wouldn't help me if I do that,
That's right. It doesn't help you, doesn't deal with the problem, and also doesn't fix the relationship. Yeah. All it does is assign blame to somebody else who, what, are they alive or dead? Alex, your parents?
They're alive.
They're alive, yeah. So what do you go? Round them up. You did this and you did that to me. And that's going to help that relationship too, isn't it? No. No, it's not going to, is it? You got to learn how to own your own stuff. Everybody does. And if your mum asks, then you might sit down with her and say, but actually running around there and telling her, well, that's a very unloving thing. She's not asking. Right? So there's a whole heap of things we do to avoid this stuff. And
the only thing I was suspicious last week was because I didn't feel any grief. And I know if I feel grief, I understand the whole process I just made. And I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what just happened.
Yeah.
I thought I felt something, I had a process, but I didn't.
No, what you felt was the tantrum of facing your fear.
Okay.
And what you did was...
That wasn't, yeah, okay.
What the action you took was, I was away, I got to go where she is.
Okay.
That's the action taken in the avoidance. So
it takes you back up to that addiction level.
if I was older, I would have felt impressed by your action. Oppressed by your action.
I always think about it like this, you know, it's almost like your grief is in the center of the circle. And you do have fears that you've taken on and that you believe are real, and then you have addictions you're using to cover that whole inner process.
But it must be said that most of your fears are choices.
Yeah.
And also most of your addictions are choices.
In general, you mean?
Yeah.
And your rage is also a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can't actually access any grief if you're still actively in addiction. So even if you touch into fear and then you go straight back to addiction, you're back out here. You're not getting closer to that grief, you know. And as Jesus said, a lot of what we call fear is just justification and
rage, really.
Rage.
Yeah.
There's some of us do have legitimate terror. And
From childhood experience, like let's say your father belted you a lot, then obviously a violent childhood is mean you're going to have some childhood terror, right? Some actual fear.
Yeah. But if we're always like touching fear or touching rage and going back to addiction, we're never getting close. You can't actually be in an addiction and deal with the grief about that issue. You just can't. It's like a barrier you're placing against the grief is the addiction. So
Because remember, addiction is fear is rage is you see the pattern? Grief, is that a sin? No. Interestingly, God gave it to you, ducks. Interesting. Not just to keep your eyes watered, but also to allow you to process emotion in a grieving state. But most of us, when we try to deal with emotion, we stay in these states, right? And we call it processing. It's not processing. Rage is not processing. Fear is not processing. You know, or you could call it terror, by the way, is processing. Because when you're in a state of terror, you do actually get to the state where you no longer justify fears. But fear is not processing, and addiction, fear is, I'm saying, I'm afraid, I don't want to go there, I'm afraid, I don't want to go there. You saw an example of it yesterday with Manu when he was here, in a state of fear, couldn't even listen to an answer, wanted to speak all the time. Spirits with him were driving his interaction with me, totally. He has a blockage with his father, he can't listen to a man at all, and I'm sure any of you who have been men in particular trying to relate to him in some way, you'll find there's this time happening. But in the moment, he's also got these spirits going, we are dead scared of this idea that we're not a part of God. Like these spirits are in a panic, and so he goes in a panic, he's in this fear, and what does he do? Doesn't listen, that's a sin. He's asked a question and doesn't give an opportunity to answer. That's also a sin, by the way, to do that. If you ask somebody a question, the right thing to do is listen to their answer. You know, that's a righteous thing to do. It's not righteous to stop them from even being able to answer and just keep going. He also barraged all of you with his problem, with his emotional problem, and that's also a sin. He was unloving there too. But he doesn't realize that because in the moment, the spirits with him are going, I'm in a panic. Fear is saying, stay in the panic, keep going, you know, do what you would normally do, right? You saw another example of it with the lady that was down the front, and we don't know her name, who was asking Mary whether it's all right that she loves me. I'm going, but never gave us an opportunity to respond, never gave us, spirits with her, again, in a panic, causing her to be in a panic. She's in her addiction. I've just got to get somebody to tell me I'm okay doing this. We're trying to tell her, no, it's not okay. But the spirits with her don't want to hear that because the spirits have been invested in that for years, being that way, and so stays in that. Now, one of the things Mira and I would like to, if we get the chance, we'll talk to those spirits involved in those interactions, and potentially we can help alleviate those, help those spirits to get away from the person so the person feels themselves for a change. But most probably, who knows what will happen there? It will depend on addictions and their other feelings as well as to what would happen after that. But in the end, you do so many things, just in little things. When you say little, sins, committing sins all the time, thinking that, I'm justified because my addiction wasn't met. I'm justified because I am afraid. I'm justified now, and so I feel like, I want to get, enraged with the world. And none of it is dealing with a cause of a problem. And also, all of it is further sin.
So the best thing would do after your feedback to create the will to be really loving on an emotional level, and check if it's just intellectual or emotional.
You're not going to be able to be loving unless you awaken to sin.
So you've got to at the moment, there's not a high motivation to feel the sin that's in you.
Or to feel the addictions or the fears or the rage.
Or that whole process that you're engaging to avoid the sin, there's not a high motivation to find it. So
that's what you need to work on.
that's what you need to work on.
You would need to work on getting to the awakening. Getting to the point of awakening. That's
And
what
you know, to do that, you're going to have to avoid self-attack and judgment, but also want to see where you're harming others. Also be compassionate with yourself, but not justify what you're doing.
It's pretty tricky. You need a lot of integrity to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of integrity.
But it can be done. Yeah. It's very rewarding to do it, actually.
Yeah. Yvette?
When you say that rage is a sin, is it still a sin if you're having an interaction with somebody, you're rageful and you go elsewhere, you are on the boxing bag, for example, processing your rage.
Yep.
You might not hit grief, let's say, because you're a bit resistant. Are you still sinning in that place?
The reason why, if you look at rage, let's say I go and punch a bag. But I never get below it, right? Why am I punching the bag? What's my purpose of punching it? So it's like, I've got to let out all this bottled up anger. Now, I've got to let it out somewhere. Don't want to hit Mary. So go outside, kick the boxing bag, bangs the boxing bag, like whatever. So I do that, but I don't get anything below it. What's happened? Why did I do that? What was my purpose?
So I'd get my addiction of my anger into something else and not feel the fear.
No, what does anger give you?
Power.
Gives you a sense of power. So your aim is to get power over your grief, over your fears. That's the purpose of anger. So I go out, kick the bag, bash the bag. If I don't understand, right, that my goal is to get power over my grief by doing this, then you can see that straight away expressing it is of no benefit to me at all. And in fact, it's supporting my concept that getting power over grief is a good thing. So even though I might not now be damaging Andy or kids or whatever, I'm still damaging my own self-concept. I'm still sinning against my soul. So it's still a sin because my soul wants to let out the grief. And I'm saying, no, suppress it with power, with rage. You follow?
Yeah.
So I am still sinning because I'm still suppressing it. I'm still trying to control it. I'm still trying to get control of the fear and the grief that's under the fear. I'm still trying to gain some control. In addition, most of the time when we're in a rage, it's because my addiction wasn't back. So basically when I go out and punch a bag and say, like I'm really just having a tantrum about my addiction not getting met. Now, with a child, bringing up a child, because you brought up 3 now, right? So you know that whenever a child goes into a tantrum, do you get much sense out of them after that? Do they become more loving in their tantrum? Definitely not, do they?
No.
Like they become far more unloving in their tantrum, don't they? They'll hit you, punch you, they'll kick and scream, and they'll make the whole world know that they are avoiding their grief, right? And so this is the purpose of the rage, is to gain some power over it all.
And,
Right.
and may I add, like, say I land in Yvette's life, I'll switch bodies with you, right? Tomorrow. I've been landing in this, or you are in a situation where you've got a lot of relationships, close relationships. You've got 3 kids and a husband you're living with.
Yep.
Now, you, where you are in your progression, like everyone in this room, you've got some addictions. You've also got some equality in these relationships. Some of it you've set up, some of it you've accepted. There's ways that you're being harmed, but also ways that you're demanding things of other people. And to sort all that out is going to take sensitivity, isn't it? It's going to take some consideration. You're going to have to feel yourself. You're going to have interactions, reflect, have some grief, have some fears maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But if I just, it's all happening and I'm like, ugh, I'm just angry and I just go and punch a bag. What have I avoided? I've avoided all these difficult conversations. I've avoided all this sensitivity to myself and the people around me. And what do they really feel? And what do I really feel? I know from my own experience, sometimes rage has been a way to almost detune further. It's a response to my overwhelm, if you like. Everything feels complicated. I just don't feel loved. I don't know if that's because my addiction isn't being met or other people are demanding, and the work is figuring all that out and being sensitive to all of that and being compassionate with yourself and everyone around you as you do that, because you're not going to get it tomorrow. But often my rage was a way to just avoid that whole sensitive, sometimes it feels scary and vulnerable and sometimes it feels sad process of sorting out the relationships around you and yourself, and primarily yourself, but that will have an effect on the relationships around you.
Okay. Yeah. Because sometimes I hit the bang and then I can cry afterwards, but other times I won't be able to. So in that case, is it better to stop it and
Well, you know, the reason why you first need to hit the bag, in other words, have the tantrum, before you can cry, there's a reason. So there's a justified reason going on, as I have justification to be angry about this.
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed. If you don't address that, you'll keep needing to be angry before you get sad. So you can say the anger is like a layer on top of your sadness, preventing a full expression of your sadness. Does that make sense? So you're never going to get to the bottom of your sadness doing this. At the end of the day, it needs to change, and you need to get to the stage where you no longer go into rage and you just straight away go into sadness.
Yeah.
Right?
It can help if you, in that process of hitting the bag, emotionally realize your demand. Because every time you're angry, you have a demand. Whether it's demand not to feel grief, demand someone meet my addiction.
So in other words, Mary's saying, you see your addiction.
yes.
Yeah.
If in that process that connects you to that, that's helpful, isn't
Helpful,
it?
Yeah.
But
not the solution.
it's you still got to do the work on the demand. It's like what Nettie shared last weekend. You know, he had to come to the point where he realised, and I recognise this in my own journey as well, where you realise every time I'm angry, I'm just demanding something from my environment change, rather than feel what I feel.
And rather than me change.
Yeah.
Or
Because-
me change something.
I'm trying to force change externally rather than me have to make changes in my own
Frequently what we want is everyone around us to make changes without us even telling them they need to. Without us even informing them that the reason why we feel they need to. Without us even having confronting discussions about what's going on and why we feel the way we do. We just want everybody imaginally around us go, oh, Yvette's unhappy. How can we all make her happy? You know, like that's what we want. We basically want everybody to know that you're unhappy without you having to say you're unhappy, and without you having to express it, and without you having to experience it. And you also want them to work out that, you naughty people, that you haven't worked out that. And then we go down this track, we're going, oh, if they don't work it out, they don't love me. So now I'm adding to my expectations, actually. All right? And so quite often we go off and have our tantrum because nobody loves me. I've got to deal with all this myself. Feelings, right? And you know what? You're dead right. You're going to have to deal with it all yourself. It's in you. Nobody else can do it for you. And if you expect them to, then basically what you're going to be doing is engaging addiction to overcome a feeling in you that's never going to get overcome by the addiction. And that's the problem, is that this is the potential of what the rage creates. So I've seen people stay in rage for a long time, like hundreds of years, rage, in the spirit world, it's very rare for a person to stay in rage less than like 10 years. I remember the channeling last week, Netu, he stayed in rage for 3 months. That's pretty rare. It's very rare to stay in rage just for 3 months. Most people stay in rage a lot longer than that. And on earth, it's almost half of their life they stay in rage, generally.
Well, if everyone in this room is very honest, they're harbouring anger about something for many years, at least one issue.
Yeah.
And this is the other thing, when you go and punch the bag, sometimes it helps you realise, whoa, I'm really angry about this issue that I've been denying that for years.
Yeah.
That's also helpful, but again, it's, as Jesus said, not the solution.
Not the solution.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's important for us to say rage is a sin, anger is a sin. I'm not saying don't feel it, because obviously you need to know and understand yourself enough to know you are feeling it, but you also need to see, I'm feeling this because I actually don't want to go there. I actually don't want to deal with the real problem, whatever the real problem is. And frequently we do that for lots and lots of different reasons, and each of us have created a whole labyrinth of internal dialogue as to why we shouldn't have to go there for the most part.
I had an experience, this is some years ago now, where I felt like I'd been doing work on my relationship with my parents in this life. I felt like I'd been dealing with things. I felt like I understood how that affected me. I sort of saw the issue, and I hadn't seen my parents for 5 or 6 years maybe. I needed to go and see my mum and collect something. And when I got there, whoa, I got angry. I got so angry. It's the first time in my adult life that I was angry at my mum, but I was really angry with her. And I left there going, I haven't done anything. I'm still demanding that she change rather than grieve, So, yeah.
Easy to stay in those states for long times. Now,